I'll just leave it down
No,
until
don't.
later. Why
Hold
can't I?
They're all muted. Now see,
they're
they're
all-
all on.
Okay.
Yeah. And you want that on, right?
I would just.
We don't want that on, no, it just came
Can
down
we
by
just
mistake.
leave it until, because if I
Yeah,
try
we
to
can
put
leave
it back up.
This is what happens when you try to do up. They were breaking things for us?
I think the screen was different.
Okay. You're right. Good point. Right. Okay, I'm going to call the Human Affairs Committee to order. It's November 13th, 2019, 7 PM. We're here in the Aldermanic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Patricia Clee. Here. Alderwoman Marianne Malizi Goja. Present. Alderman Linda Harriet Gathright, present. Alderman June Karen. Here. And our chairperson, Alderman at Large Lori Wilshire.
Here. Okay, we have
Full.
all members present. Thank you. Public comment? Communications.
Carrie Schema, Urban Programs Manager, CAC Staff Liaison. Fiscal year 20 CAC funding to Harbor Homes.
There being no objection, I'll accept the communication and place it on file. Unfinished business.
None.
New business resolutions.
R19-182, relative to the acceptance and appropriation of $25,000 from JSI Research and Training Institute into Public Health and Community Service Grant Activity, Fiscal Year 20 Environmental Health Tracking.
Alderwoman Malizi Goya.
Motion to recommend final passage.
Motion before us is to recommend final passage. Patty, are you here to talk on this grant?
Yes, I am.
Can you join us? Thank you. If you give your name and job title, we will.
My name is Patty Crooker. I work for the Division of Public Health and Community Services as the Public Health Network Services Coordinator.
Can you give us some background on this grant? Is this a new grant?
Absolutely. It's actually the second part of a grant. We had applied for a sub-award instead of coming directly from the state Healthy Homes Program and Environmental Public Health Tracking. They put out an award or a request for proposals to do some type of environmental health project. And the first award was for 6 months in FY19. This is for the second part, which will be all through 2020. It will be retroactive until July 1st, which is great. And during the first part of the award, we created some toolkits for both healthcare providers and childcare providers and are now distributing them throughout the region to be able to inform them about how to talk to their patients or parents of the kids about lead, how to identify some new rules that came along with legislation that passed in 2018 about lead testing. And the overall goal is to increase the blood lead testing in kids under 6 within the region, because we have typically low numbers and we have a high occurrence region because of the age of the housing stock and such.
Thank you. Alderwoman Malizi Goya.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, and you alluded to it. This is another grant that we will be doing the work for the region. So we're acting as the regional kind of health coordination.
Absolutely.
People.
Because Nashua is one of only 2 local health departments,
Right.
then our region relies on us to be able to push some of that information out, and the network services programs are funded to do that through Nashua and the 12 surrounding towns.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? The motion before us is to recommend final passage of Resolution 19-182. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
New business resolutions.
None.
General discussion. Oh, this is where we will discuss the welfare. We will have a welfare discussion. Please feel free to join us. You can join us as well if you, okay. Thank you, though. You're welcome.
To know that we don't bite. Yeah.
Good evening, Bob Mack. How are you?
Good evening. I'm terrific, thank you.
Good.
How are you?
Good. Thank you for coming tonight.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Sure. So,
So,
so
would
you
like
were
me to-
invited to give us well, to talk to us about welfare standards. I
Yes.
know that Alderman Lopez had some concerns that maybe the needs of the people coming weren't being met. I don't know that that's a legit concern, so maybe you can help us with that.
Okay, well, I'll do my best.
Okay.
So, again, thank you for inviting me. I'm Bob Mack. I'm the welfare officer for the city of Nashua, part of the Division of Public Health and Community Services. And yes, as you said, Alderman Wilshire, there was some question about our processes, procedures, guidelines, and just some concern that constituents, people in our community were getting assistance that they needed and were eligible for. So we had a meeting, we talked a little bit about that. I think it was yourself, Alderman Lopez, myself, and Director Bagley. And out of that meeting, we decided to pull together a review committee, which Alderman Klee participated in, Alderman Lopez, and a few community members, nonprofit executive directors participated in it. We had, now I'm going to go down the list, and I have to make sure I remember everyone. Michael Reinke from the Soup Kitchen and Shelter, Maurice Orbel from the Front Door Agency, Pam Wellman from Anne Marie House. We also invited Kathy Wilson, who is the welfare officer from Hudson, the town of Hudson, and Pat Murphy, and she is the welfare officer for Merrimack. She is also the president of the New Hampshire Local Welfare Administrators Association, of which I'm a executive board member as well. So, and Director Bagley was there, and I think that was everyone.
I think so.
I believe so. I hope
Felt
so.
like a very, felt like
So-
a very full room. But
And we had some good discussion, some good conversation. We went through the guidelines, and out of that committee, a couple things came out of that committee. One was to do a presentation at our Greater Nashua Continuum of Care regarding our processes, our eligibility criteria, and kind of touch upon the guidelines. So we have scheduled that. Pat Murphy and myself are going to be doing that. I believe it's December 3rd. It's the first Wednesday of December at the Greater Nashua Continuum of Care meeting, which is here in the auditorium upstairs at 8 a.m. It's the first Wednesday of each month.
the fourth.
December 4th, yeah.
December, oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Good.
So we'll be doing that presentation, and also an invitation to come to speak to this committee. So, again, I appreciate the opportunity. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go over a brief overview of some of the highlights, I guess, of the guidelines and the process where it kind of originated from, if I may. So,
Please. Alderwoman Malizia Golden?
Just before we move off of this, for people who may be watching, the meeting on December 4th at 8 a.m.,
yes.
members of the public who might like to come to get more information are able to attend that meeting?
Sure, that's a public
Public
meeting.
meeting, right.
It's put on by the Greater Nashua Continuum of Care.
Right.
The primary focus of that meeting is to focus on homelessness and homeless prevention and different services and things going on in the community to address those issues.
Okay,
And that's an open meeting. It happens, again, the first Wednesday of each month at 8 a.m.
yeah, just to clarify if
Sure.
someone's listening and they're
Yeah.
interested. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. So basically, our City of Nashua General Assistance Guidelines are based on the Model Welfare Guidelines, which were created by the New Hampshire Local Welfare Administrators Association in conjunction with the New Hampshire Municipal Association's legal department. Basically, they were created to create some consistency across the state, because in accordance with RSA 165, each municipality in the state must provide some form of general assistance. It's a state mandate, and that statute says that each municipality must have written guidelines as to how they are going to administer that general assistance. So the association, again, working with the New Hampshire Municipal Association, said, let's come up with a model so that communities will have some consistent application of how they administer this assistance. So according to the statute, each governing body of the municipality must adopt these written guidelines relative to the administration of general assistance. And the guidelines must contain at least the following items, but not limited to these items. And that would include the application process to apply for general assistance, the criteria for determining eligibility for that assistance, which is often referred to as standard of need, the process for appealing any decision that's made by the welfare office, and the process of application of rents, and that basically addresses applying any rental payments to a landlord, and if that landlord owes any money to the municipality, that payment, whatever is owed to the municipality, can be deducted from that payment and applied to any debt to the city, and it has no recourse against the tenant that's receiving that assistance.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
In what circumstance would the landlord owe the city money?
It could be like a wastewater bill that wasn't paid, or a tax lien if they
Okay.
didn't pay their
All right.
taxes. So it's very limited. It's very rare that happens.
Right, okay.
But according to the statute, it has to be in the guidelines. So
That makes
if
sense.
it's not in the guidelines, you couldn't take that action,
Okay,
if you will.
thank you.
And then there's one other piece that needs to be in there, is a statement of how benefits received by a client may be deemed if there's any sort of sanction. So it basically says if someone is entitled to a benefit and they don't comply with that benefit and receive a sanction, so a reduced benefit, the municipality can actually consider the full amount of that benefit. So if they were supposed to get $800, and because they're under sanction, they only get $500, we could theoretically count the full $800 in any sort of eligibility determination. So those are the items that must be contained in the guidelines. And the guidelines, again, are developed based on legal interpretation of the statute to, as they say, they are guidelines, so they guide the municipality's administration of general assistance. So some of the items that are noted in the guidelines are this concept to relieve or maintain those that are poor or unable to sustain themselves. So it identifies and defines what those terms mean. So to relieve someone is to assist them, as the welfare official shall determine, to meet basic needs. So we, through an interview process with the client, determine what the basic needs are for their particular circumstance. You know, if they are a single individual, they may only need a one-bedroom shelter unit, if you will, or living arrangement. If they have multiple children, they may need to live in a three-bedroom unit. So we consider those things based on what their household composition is and what their need is. And then maintained means continued assistance as long as they are eligible. And some of the things that we look at as we determine this eligibility is what are their available resources, what are some other alternative resources, less costly resources to the municipality, or just available items that can meet their need. So for example, if someone is homeless and there is a shelter program that could accommodate their household size, we make that referral to that shelter program, and that will meet their need. So in accordance with the guidelines, their need has been met. Even though we haven't provided any direct assistance to them, we've connected them to a resource that will meet their basic need. And again, we're really looking at basic needs. There are some things that we don't consider. We have caps on rents, for example. So if someone is living in a living unit that costs $2,500 a month, and there's only 2 people, we may say, well, we can look at that for now, but you may need to look for less costly housing that you can sustain. And we look back at those financial standards to identify what that is.
Just, that's got to be difficult. I mean, because the rents are so high right now.
Right, right.
How do you deal with that?
It can be challenging, and that's why while the base, the body of the guidelines, the foundation of the guidelines doesn't change very much over time, the things that do change are some of the standards and the financial standards. So we recently updated our financial standards. We do it about every 12 to 24 months. Usually it's annual. And we look at different resources that identify fair market rents in the community. We look at the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority Residential Rental Cost Survey. And based on those numbers, we will present some proposed cap rents for different units. And again, it's based on their survey.
Alderman Clee.
I don't want to derail the conversation, but one of the things that I was really new to this, so I didn't have a whole lot of input as to your guidelines when I was at that meeting. But one of the things that I found, having all those people there from the front door agencies and all these agencies, was how well collaboratively they work together. My only input, I think, in that meeting was kind of something I kept nagging about, was how we get the information out to people that they know of these services.
Yeah.
We have the toolkit, which is great for someone to go on, but usually by the time that they contact Mr. Mack or anybody at the front door agency, they're desperate. And when you have a desperate person, there's less than little you can do for them. So that was kind of one of my input, that I'd ask that we get these PSAs out there. What do you do if? And don't wait till you're 3 months in arrears and you're being evicted. Wait till you see that there's an issue coming up and then go. And while we do have all these wonderful services, the toolkits and everything, my only real concern was, how do people know how to get started? So we have these things, and you have a list of what available, which there isn't a whole lot available out there because we know inventory is so low. But how do people know? Do they contact Front Door first? And the reason I know all this is because I got involved when I had a constituent who was literally within weeks of being put out on the street, and to know that you had to be able to pay this back within a reasonable time, that first and last rent. And so they were contacting everybody, and literally everybody was telling them to contact the next person. Yeah. And that's where the confusion came. So I think we have really good guidelines in place, and I think we have a great collaborative action. I just don't think the public knows how to traverse that kind of a system. And I think that would be my only complaint about it. And I didn't mean to derail it, so I want to let you continue, but we have a great system. It's just getting it to work even better, I think.
So one comment to what you just said, Alderman Clee. We do have a great network of providers who work very collaboratively. I mean, we're very
Good-hearted
fortunate
people.
in that respect. The agencies all work very well together.
They are.
Yes. Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah.
Alderman Gathright.
Okay. I'm not sure exactly where I was reading, but when I was reading through here, if someone put in an application for assistance or whatever,
Yes.
it's 5 days, up to 5 days before they're notified?
That's a good question. It all depends on the circumstance. One of the things that we do, we have an intake and assessment process. So when someone either comes to our office or is referred to our office, they see the first step is they see our intake worker, and she assesses the situation and what the need is. And depending on that need, it may be a few days, but it may be, if they come in and their electricity is off and we have all the information we need to do an eligibility assessment, like their income versus expense information, we might have them fill out an application and they may be seen that day, and we may be able to help them that day. So it's all based on urgency of need. If someone has an eviction notice, for example, they have a few days to kind of get through that process. Even though oftentimes they feel like, I have to take care of this right now, we have to kind of say, well, you have some time. This is what we need you to do. Take this application, take this rental form, have your landlord fill it out. bring us your income versus expense information, we need current bank information, et cetera, whatever is applicable to that case. And then the intake worker will schedule the appointment, give them the list of required documents, the paperwork they need to complete and have completed, and then they come back for that scheduled appointment. They come in, they meet with a case technician, and then they go through all the paperwork with the client, and they determine what they may be eligible for. That's based on a financial assessment, but also, again, an urgency of need. So we do what we can to prevent homelessness because it's much more effective to keep somebody housed than to try to get somebody back into housing if they've already been evicted. So probably 90-some-odd% of the cases we see are prevention of homelessness, eviction prevention. And that could be in the form of rental assistance. It could be in the form of utility assistance, because if they don't pay their utility bill, their electricity gets shut off, they might lose a housing subsidy. Or if they're paying their utility bill and then they can't pay their rent, they could get evicted. So it's it's a complex process, and we look at all these different factors that come into play. The staff are very well trained and capable of doing these eligibility interviews. They're also very knowledgeable about alternative resources. So if there is a case that someone does not qualify for our assistance, we try to connect them to some other resource in the community that might be able to assist them. Or if we can only cover a portion of what they need to cure an eviction, let's say, they can get the remainder of that through another social service organization. So that these partnerships that you mentioned are imperative for our community as a whole.
Follow-up? Yes. Okay, and if they're denied the service, I think I read they have 3 days to put in a petition or a hearing or something like that?
There are five business days to request a hearing or an appeal, and that's outlined in the guidelines as well. And that's a formal process. We have a neutral third party that comes in and basically hears both sides of the case. The client gets to present their side, and then we just present our side, and then that fair hearings officer takes the information, and then they have a period of time to make a decision within I think it's 5 to 7 days. And then that decision, whatever their decision is, stands. If they uphold our decision, then our decision stands. If they overturn our decision, then the applicant gets the assistance that they had applied for.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Alderwoman Malisi Gilliam.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, to your earlier comment, I would agree. I think that our nonprofits do a great job of working together rather than competing for dollars and resources within the community. To the appeals process, how often does that happen?
That's a great question.
What percentage of your denials would you say get it? Well, I guess my interest would be, how many cases do you have a year? How many do you deny requests? And what percentage of those get overturned or go to appeal?
Okay.
Complicated.
Well, I could get you more specifics on those data points if you'd like. I don't know those off the top of my head,
Okay.
how many are denied or assisted. This past month, I think we assisted about 70% of the applicants.
Okay.
So
So
the
30%
appeals-
were denied?
so 30% were denied
Okay.
for whatever reason. It could be that they were out of compliance with what we had required of them. It could be that they just didn't meet a standard of need and there was some other resource. But about 70%, I think, this past month. Now that changes. It goes from 50% to 60. Usually it's around 60%, I would say, consistently with that fluctuation. We probably assist about 60% of the people that apply. As I mentioned, if we can't assist them, we do what we can to connect them to some alternative resource that may be able to assist them. Or in some cases, we're able to help them, for example, get into a payment arrangement with a utility company, and they don't need our assistance to do that, but they just couldn't navigate that system. So we help provide that service for them to get them on an even keel and a payment arrangement, a payment plan. So your question about how many fair hearings and appeals do we have, we don't get too many. Usually when we get them, I think it comes in like 2s or 3s. So if we get one, we're probably going to get 1 or 2 more within a month. But we may have 8 a year, give or take. There could be some years that it's more common, but it's not like a monthly occurrence that we have these requests. But it seems when we get them, they come like 2 or 3 at a time. So
All right. Thank
Alderman
you.
Clee.
I don't know if this would be useless data. For me, it seems like it would be. But you said that you might have like a 40% denial rate or a 30% denial rate. That's such a flat number, knowing that they may not have qualified for whatever the reason is.
yes.
If we knew something to the nature of what types of the reason for denials, and how many of those were you able to help in another way? Because you did speak to, if someone came in with homeless and they met this criteria, you would not necessarily give them services, but you would refer them to a place.
Correct.
Would that fall within your denial, or would that just not even become part of your statistics? Because I think that's really important. When we think
Yes.
about that we denied 40% or even 30%, we go, and aghast. But if we know that these people are still getting some kind of service or some kind of aid,
Yes.
whether we're the one that writes the check, I think that would be helpful in your
Yes.
numbers, and I think it would kind of, help the blow a little
Yes.
bit, And
No.
I think that's an important, to me, it would be an important.
It's a very good question, and I would say it's probably about 50-50 for people that we either connect to some other resource, such as a shelter. So if we do refer them to a shelter program,
Right.
we're not providing direct assistance. That would be a denial of general assistance because we didn't provide any direct general assistance. If we're able to help set them up on a payment arrangement with a utility company, that would fall under that denial category. Even though their need was met, it wasn't met through general assistance dollars. So it goes as a denial of assistance.
But I think the clear thing we need to do is it still takes resources. You had your human resources people working with them, that your physical people, whether it was the intake person
Yes.
or so on, that takes city resources. Even though we're not writing a check for it, we're still using city resources. So for me, that isn't a failure of the system. It's actually making the system work in a better and
Yes.
effective manner. And as I said, like with the front door, the reason why people would contact one place and then another place and so on, and then keep getting referred was because there is a process, but the average person doesn't know. They just know, let's call all these people.
Yes.
And these people say, well, I can help you when they can't help you.
Right.
And that's why they keep getting
Right.
referred. So that's why we need to know what that process is. But
Yes.
and I think, to me, that's not a failure of our system when they actually get help. To me, that's a success. And that's exactly what was spoken about here. We have such great nonprofit resources. I think that makes us a better community. And when these nonprofits are there to help us and so on to get the job done, I think it makes us more of a success.
Yes.
And I'd like to show that rather than show a 30% denial rate, because people take that as a failure. And it's not a failure if we've given them some of the resources. So if you took that 30% or 40% and half of those, now we really only have 20% that people might not have gotten services. That's an easier, it's still, we'd like to have all of it, but it's still an easier, we feel like we're being more productive as a city and as a.
Yes. And thank you, Alderman Clee, for bringing that up. And in most instances, agencies want them to come through our
Right.
local welfare department first to have an assessment done before they can assist. Oftentimes, people come in and they say, I'm just here to get a denial notice so I can go get help
Right.
at another agency.
Alderwoman Malizia Goya.
Thanks. I would just second Alderman Klee's comments. And I also think it's important to have that data because as people are applying for grants, I think it's good data to have to show how well we do work together
It
and
will help them.
and how our systems are supporting each other. And I think all of us are familiar enough with grant writing that they want to know, who do you collaborate with and how do you collaborate and how often do you collaborate and what need are you meeting in the community. So to know that your office and the city office serves as kind of the acknowledged grant gateway to services in the community. and that those individuals who are denied are not really being kept from services, but a great percentage of them are actually being referred to other agencies where there are systems in place. I mean, if someone is coming to you and says, "Oh, I'm not here really to get your services, I just need a denial letter," that tells me there's a system in place between at least your office and whatever agency they're going to. So I think it would be really helpful to have some sort of method for capturing that data. And even if it is referrals for utilities or helping people navigate the system, again, you're doing community education, you're doing client education, and you obviously have people within the power company or the gas and electric company, whatever, that you have an into, so you have a direct line rather than me calling and jumping through hoops. And I think all of that, when it's documented and described, gives a better picture of the strength of our community in working together with other agencies that may even be outside of the city of Nashua to support the needs of our citizens. So I would second your recommendation, because I just think it's important to have those numbers at your fingertips to prove, yeah, we have a great system, and look at how it's working. And again, but it does cost the city dollars to help people through that process. But I think you can then justify those dollars by saying, but we're not providing lodging because this denial letter is getting them into the front door of Marguerite's Place or wherever.
And that's another great point. I will have to look at our welfare software system to see how we can pull some of that data out, because right now our notices of decision don't distinguish between those different types of denials. We did create a notice of referral, and that has worked for some agencies, but some agencies want our notice of denial and rather than a notice of referral. So, but that's definitely something I can look into and see if I can work either with the IT department or if it's something that we can do within our system to tweak just how we identify those different types of notices of decision. So,
I just
Thank
have a
you.
quick follow-up, and I know Alderwoman Gathert wants to comment. Yeah, and I think, this is me sitting here agreeing with Alderman Clee, but I think that it would be beneficial to, before you do that tweaking, to maybe reach out to your like 5 most frequent partners in providing services and say, hey, look, we're going to start trying to keep count of these numbers. How can we do it so it will be helpful to you too? So if you need it, we can pull it up, and it's going to be easy for you to roll it into a grant you're writing where you talk about how we work together. So I would just kind of reach out to partners to find out what would help them. So we have a system that's useful to everyone who might need access to that data.
Makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Guthrie?
I agree with both the other aldermen, but my question is, when you do the denial, when you do the write-up, for whatever the reason, do you document at all that you're referring them to some other agency? Is that part of your documentation on that person's record?
Yes, it is.
It
There's, we can choose any number of requirements and referrals within our welfare software system, and that comes out on a written notice of decision, and that's part of our guidelines. We're required to issue that for each application that comes into the office. They need a written notice of decision, and that will print right out on that outcome.
On that decision.
On the decision, and it's kind of how I have to figure out if we're able to track some of that information through that system.
Okay.
So, thank you.
So,
Yeah.
follow-up. So I guess that would be manual labor. But yeah, in this day and age, I think something like that really needs to be automated. So, for
Yeah.
statistical records.
Yeah.
Yeah, purposes.
Well, do you always, I mean, like you might tell somebody, I know there's a shelter bed open, and they refuse to go to the shelter. I mean,
Yes.
how do you deal with that? I mean, and you may say there's a shelter bed open, and they never go there.
Right.
So how do you?
Yeah, that's another good point.
Because they don't want to go to a shelter.
Right.
Yeah.
And they may say flat out, I'm not going to a shelter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If they do that, then we're not able to provide any further assistance.
Right.
But there are occasions where they say, oh, yeah, I'll go to the shelter, and then we get a call from the shelter, oh, they never
They
came.
never came, right. So they're holding that bed for somebody that's not going to
right,
come.
right. And that's why we work with our community partners. We have worked diligently over the last number of years to develop and enhance a coordinated entry process, which is a centralized process where people who are experiencing homelessness or at risk can go through this one main access point and call an 800 number and have an assessment done and then be referred to the appropriate agency, whether it be city welfare or a shelter program or some other alternative.
Okay.
I just,
Alderman Clee.
just one real quick, the 800 number, I really was not aware of that. Is that something that's on the website, or how would someone know
99%
this?
sure it's on our website. It's
I look for-
844-800-9911.
800-9991?
844-800-9911. And that's our coordinated entry line. And we have a number of community partners that participate and cover that line. We have the Nashua Soup Kitchen covers the phone line, the Southern New Hampshire Rescue Mission, the Front Door Agency. I think I mentioned the Nashua Soup Kitchen and Shelter, and the Mobile Crisis Response Team. And so there's that community partnership as well. I don't think I missed anybody there.
No, but if you want to continue with
Bridges, I'm
Oh,
sorry,
Bridges,
Bridges.
okay, with your,
I'm sorry.
no, we kind of all got, but I
Oh,
didn't know
yeah.
if you had finished what you wanted to tell us about.
I think I've covered, I was just talking about
Okay.
how we develop our financial standards and the reports that they're based on, the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, USDA food stamp allowances, and the Consumer Price Index. So that those are the resources we use to determine current costs to live within our community. And the importance of looking at those reports is it gives you your community costs, because those don't always compare to some other community. It's not the same cost to live in Nashua as it is to live in Berlin, as it is to live in Keene or Pittsburgh or Mason or wherever in the state. So we follow those reports to come up with those financial standards. Everything that we do through this, again, comes through the Mayor and Board of Aldermen for your review and approval. And then we act accordingly based on those approved guidelines. So one thing I just wanted to note, our current guidelines are about 30 some odd pages. I was looking through some old paperwork and found these guidelines from 1976.
Wow.
They're about 20 pages, but actually not a lot in the body of the guidelines has changed. We still have an application process. We still have legal requirements. We still have appeal processes. Some of them have been tweaked a little bit here and there, but again, the financial standards have changed on a very consistent basis. I think the rents back in '76 were a little bit lower than they are now.
A little bit.
So those financial standards have changed significantly over the years. So, again, the purpose of the guidelines is for our welfare officials to be able to deliver a fair and reasonable decision that's consistent across the board, so that if somebody comes in and says, oh, I didn't get treated, my decision wasn't treated the same as that decision. We have people all the time, they come in, they say, oh, I heard you put somebody in a motel. Can you put me in a motel? Not necessarily, because your circumstances may be completely different than theirs. And it comes back to our guidelines and how we make those eligibility determinations. So that is really the importance of having these guidelines. As I said up front, it's for consistent administration of general assistance across the state and from each case that comes through our door. So
I have a question, and maybe you can answer and maybe you can't. How many emergency beds do we have in the city? Any idea?
like emergency shelter beds?
Yeah.
Let's see, the Nashua Soup Kitchen and Shelter and the Southern New Hampshire Rescue Mission are the two main shelters in our community. The Southern New Hampshire Rescue Mission can house around 40 single men, shelter them. The Nashua Soup Kitchen and Shelter, I think they have about 10 or so family beds. So depending on the size of the family household, and those are either single parent or two parents with children, they can fit, 3 to 4 families within that family unit. And I believe they have about 20 single individual shelter beds, 10 or so for men and 10 or so for females. So based on those numbers, one of the things we've discovered, it's actually pretty obvious, is we have a shortage of single female shelter beds in our community. And we were able to validate that through looking at our coordinated entry data, which with the help of our epidemiologist, Angela Luminello, who looked at it over at the division, she pulled that data together. It was pretty extensive. That it was just a big Excel spreadsheet, and I looked at it. I said, I can't do anything with this. Can you? And she said, sure. And she put it together in a nice, organized fashion. But we're taking that data that's been organized, and that's going to our Continuum of Care Data Committee to really analyze and try to identify any additional gaps so that we can figure out where we need to focus our resources. One other thing I could mention, if I may, is the mayor had pulled together some folks from the community because he wanted to do a survey of the homeless in our community. And so next week we have coordinated some outreach where we have some outreach workers going out to find some of these homeless folks that are living under the bridges or in the woods or behind the library, places like that. So they're going to go out and make a concerted effort to count, for one, see where they're staying, count any numbers, and try to engage these people to bring them in, to get them connected to other resources that may be beneficial for them in the community. Unfortunately, some of these folks may or may not want some of the resources offered for whatever reason. So that's another thing that we have to look at is if people aren't accepting resources, why is that? And what might we need to do as a community to try to engage them a little bit better or provide additional resources for them?
Alderman Clee.
Yeah, in relation to what you just mentioned and so on, I had a conversation actually this morning with Alderman Lopez about, and I don't know if this would fall under you, I think it does, or if it would fall under emergency, but warming shelters and so on, places where people can go and when it's so cold such as this, and
Yes.
they can get coffee and so on. I know that's one thing that we are really lacking, and we don't have all that. And I know there are other issues with bed bug population and so on,
Sure.
and that's kind of shutting down some of the possible shelters and that people might open their doors for. Do we have any, would that fall within you, and do we have any plans on working towards that goal? And then I just have one other question that you could answer afterwards. When you said about the 800 number, are we connected to 211 at all? So if someone were to call 211, that they could get this information also?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me refer
Answer
to your
first, and I
second
know that's
question
just-
first.
Okay, good.
The 211 acts as the statewide
Right.
coordinated entry point, if you will. They're really doing what would be considered a crisis assessment. And I actually, this term came to me by a new organization that's taking over the homeless management information system. It's a database across the state that's pulling all the data together. And they said it's more of a crisis assessment than a coordinated entry piece. But what 211 will do is if they get the call, they put some basic information in a database, and then they direct them to the appropriate community. So they may direct them to our local coordinated entry system, that 800 number.
That 800 number, yeah.
Or in some cases, they direct them right to a possible shelter or a municipal welfare office, if you will. But, so that's kind of how it's connected.
Right.
We're still honestly fine-tuning how we respond to some of those things, because there are sometimes different moving parts, and it doesn't always work.
I
the
was
way it
just
should.
curious because people will remember a 211 number versus
Yes,
844-800-9111.
that is correct.
So I just thought if we connected with 211, even if they were just the pass-through and said,
Yep.
this is the number you need to call, that would
Yep.
be great, just as long as we had something simple. Okay, and I'm sorry that I hit you 2 questions.
That's okay. And I'm trying to remember what
About
the other
warming
question was.
shelters.
The warming shelters, yes. That, usually every year we try to put out some information through emergency management about some possible warming locations. There are some typical common places, such as people do go to the library and people do go to, 24-hour fast food places. A number of the agencies in the community open up their doors. We have Hearts, which is a great peer support program in the community that has some availability, the rescue mission, the Nashua Soup Kitchen. People can go there for meals. They can go there to get warm. So those are some of the things that we look at. We are aware of it. We're trying to pull together some of those resources. One of the committees that follows the Greater Nashua Continuum of Care meeting is the Ending Homelessness Committee, which is at 9 o'clock on the first Wednesday of each month after the COC meeting. And we're going to be looking at those things as well. So there is a challenge with finding space and staffing space and those sorts of things. So it's a challenge. We need to take a closer look at it.
Thank you. And so are you saying that the anti-homelessness group, this would be one of their topics? And
We-
I apologize for not asking.
Yes, we talk about those kinds of issues, and we will be brainstorming some of those things at the next meeting at the beginning of December. But it's cold out there now, too, so,
That's actually, I think, why this conversation came
Yeah,
up. We
yeah.
just got hit with this cold front into.
yes,
And I know that there's so many groups of people such as yourself that are going out there counting,
Yes.
checking where they are and located. And I know that in Greeley, in my area, we had a very large tent, and I was
Yes.
worried for those people.
Yeah.
They're now gone. We don't know where
Right.
they went.
Right.
But they're somewhere. So.
correct.
And I appreciate you tracking and looking and so on. I think that's great. Thank you.
And we do have the safe stations, and we do have mobile crisis that tries to provide some of that assistance as well, but.
Alderman Guthrie?
I was reading this document, which I'd never read before. Is it true, or did I understand it correctly, to say that you offer assistance to people from out of town, but then you go back to that wherever they're from and retrieve the money funds back? Do you
Yes,
get any of those types of cases?
we can try to get reimbursement from another town if someone comes from another town. The statute says that residency is not a requirement for receiving assistance. I would say there's probably as many people that may come into Nashua that may leave Nashua and go to other communities to get assistance. So, obviously we can't track that, but I know we'll get calls from Manchester and they'll say, "Do you know this person?" And I'll be like, "Nope." And then we'll call Manchester and say, "Do you know this person?" And they'll be like, "Nope." Or they'll say, "Yeah, they were here 3 months ago and we helped prevent an eviction, but then we don't know what happened." And then they got evicted and they end up couch surfing and they wind up in our community because there are resources. We have the infrastructure, there are services that they can access, and so they may apply at our department. We do work closely with our neighboring communities. If someone, for example, was evicted from an apartment in Hudson, and they somehow show up on our doorstep because they were told, "Go to Nashua City Welfare," we can say, "Well, if you didn't know it, Hudson has a town welfare office, and you can go and apply there," and that's kind of how that works.
Okay, so if someone is given service, I thought I read somewhere here as well that they sort of can become an employee, but they don't get paid because they're getting the service. Is that? How does
Yes,
that work?
that is called the Nashua Employment Opportunity Program, or the NEOP program. It's basically a work program. It's not an active program right now. It's been more active in the past. Basically what it does is it would allow a person who is receiving assistance from the city to work off that assistance, if you will, at a determined hourly rate, say $15 an hour or whatever it may be, based on a task. So in the past, we've had people do like some cleaning, janitorial work around the building at Mulberry Street if they were receiving assistance. There's pros and cons to that. There are workers' comp liability issues that may become involved. As I said, it was more active at one point in time, but it hasn't been a very active program for quite some years. We do have it in the guidelines because if we ever wanted to reinstate something like that, we could do that because it's in our guidelines.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Malizia Goya.
Yes, thank you. So I'm, in looking at the first few pages of the packet you sent us, under the chart talking about vouchers, in the second paragraph below that, you talk about the meeting that you mentioned, and that there was no real need for specific changes to the guidelines. However, a need for educating the community around welfare processes was prudent. So you're going to the continuum of care. I'm
Yes.
just wondering what else is out there and that you're planning. And I ask that because, as Alderman Klee mentioned earlier, you know, all of a sudden people find they're going to be evicted and they're like, where do I go? Where do I go? And unfortunately, there's so much information we all need to run our daily lives that if we don't think it's useful for us, we just say, oh, I don't need that.
Mhm.
I don't need to know that. But at the same time, there may be times when you need this information and you need it quickly, even though you never thought in your wildest dreams you would need this information. And certainly, gone are the days where you go to a local payphone and there's a, you know, if you need, dial this.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen anymore. I think probably the closest thing we have is over here at the bus shelter, posting something there on our buses. So I'm just wondering what kind of plans are being looked at. We tend to assume people are connected electronically, but
Yes.
sometimes you can't pay your cell phone bill, or
Right.
you really don't have access to a computer, or you don't want to go to the library for whatever the reason is. It's not always accessing information electronically. So I'm just curious.
Great question. We are part of that 211 database. They are aware of municipal welfare assistance. A lot of the social service organizations, of course, know about us, but again, to your point, people may not know about those social service organizations. So we try to market our department through other public health outreach activities. We can have information about welfare assistance through through information at those events. Actually, the division right now is working on a branding process for the entire division, and I think that's something that's going to help the welfare department as part of the Division of Public Health and Community Services to get that word out as well. So those are some of the things that we're looking at.
Follow up, please, thanks. So through this branding process, will you be then looking at reaching out to like pediatricians' offices? Is that going to be is that part of what's being looked at? And if you don't know, that's fine. But I would suggest that pediatricians might sometimes get the first inkling something's going on. And then how do you work with the schools?
as far as like pediatricians' offices, we've never really thought about that directly. That's something we can look into further. One thing with one interesting point is that doctors serve wide spans of communities, so they may or may not be directly related to come see us. We do, a lot of people that apply for state benefits get referred to us as an interim stopgap. That may help answer some of your question and concern as well. So if they're applying for some benefits, they're usually referred to us. That's just part of the process.
Okay.
And then your other
The schools.
point, the schools, we have a lot of contact with the homeless liaison for the schools. One of the things that has recently been started up is a youth homelessness subcommittee as part of the continuum of care. And we meet with the homeless liaison from the school department and a number of other agencies in the community. The last couple meetings have been over at the United Way office, and we're trying to get a better handle on counting those folks. But they are aware of some of the families in need, and they will refer people to us directly. They're pretty well aware of us.
Right. Okay. I guess, may I just, a follow-up comment? Certainly the youth homelessness process has been, or issue has been a concern for years. When I was on the school board, like 14 or 15 years ago, there were high schoolers living in cars because they knew that was better than living with their families, which, is concerning. So I'm glad, and I'm always happy when I see that getting more attention than it was then. I guess, and again, to Alderman Klee's comment, I think that it's great people know who the families are and try to help them. It's the families who we don't know but suddenly become homeless. And I totally get your point about, pediatricians maybe serving people who live up in Bedford or Merrimack or whatever. So, and those are certainly things to consider. But I think that sometimes just making sure that information's there, even if it's always like posted when you come in the front door of a school or always on the school website, the actual school's website, not necessarily the district's website, because sometimes that's way too much, or, on the back of the menu that goes home, just someplace where it's not totally in your face, but if you can say, oh, I remember seeing that. Or even to a neighbor, oh, wait, it's always on my kid's menu. Let me go get my kid's menu. And just kind of trying to find ways that are developing a pattern of where to look for that resource when you're in need and you're in crisis.
Sure. Yeah.
So that would be my only thought. I think our schools in general do a great job with identified families or families that they've been monitoring, and they know that they kind of waffle back and forth. It's the people who all of a sudden are like, oh my God.
Sure. And again, I do think through this public health branding process, a lot of what we do is fundamental to public health and its basic needs. And as this branding message gets expanded and fine-tuned and pushed out there in the community, I think there's going to be more of that when people are looking at prevention and prevention of any number of things, whether it's poverty or health issues or whatnot. It's all going to be like interconnected, and I think that's going to come out as part of this branding and messaging that's being worked on right now at the division. So it's a very good point. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Alderman Klee.
Yes, thank you. I want to kind of give a little bit of a backstory of how I got involved in this. When I first mentioned to you that I had someone who was in need and they were really at that desperate point, I got a phone call that they were 3 months in arrears and eviction process had started. And they want to know who could help, what could be done, and so on. And truth be told, I didn't know. I really didn't know so much of what you said, and it was kind of calling people, how do we help this person? That was the first case I hit. And the second was more recent, where a building was going to be sold that had a number of people that could be displaced. We didn't know, would they be doing this? And it isn't my place to go ask them, what are your plans? Or even my place to do anything like that. But you had a lot of panicked people. What do we do? And knowing that we have such small inventory, I suddenly was thinking, okay, now we're going to have like 10 families out on the street, and it could be quickly. They might give them 3 months or whatever amount of time it was. So that's when I had reached out to you on the first time on that one. But that was a more recent one. So the truth be told is you're very correct. We don't know where to go. That first case, one of the issues was the husband had been ill and out of work, and his wife had suddenly taken ill, and that's why they went into arrears. Kept thinking it was going to get better, it was going to get better, and it didn't get better. But now they're at that moment of, and one of the criteria is that they have to show that they can pay it back for this kind of loan for rent and so on, and they had no way of doing this. And one of the sad things that kind of came out was, once they're out on the street, we might be able to do more for them. But as you pointed out, who wants to be out on the street? And I'm not saying that that necessarily would have been and I did make phone calls to that particular landlord and so on, and they worked out a deal. They put it over a 6-month, those arrears and so on, and very, very kind. It's just that they were panicked. You know, we can't keep asking for this and this and so on. And that worked. And the one with the sale, everything is right now is a status quo. We don't know really what's going to happen. Everything seems to be staying fine. But that's how I kind of got involved in this. And one of the brainstorm things that I had thought about was, and I know this is really going to sound very tacky, but I got into a restroom recently, and I saw the big sign we see all the time: "Are you safe at home? If not, pull this little number." And I often thought, something as simple as that. We see these on the back of bathroom doors. And in your case, when you're talking about the schools, that's great for people who have families and children. All of these people I dealt with had no children at all. They were more of not elderly and not families with young children. Many of them were single men, single female. This particular one was a couple. And they're the people that tend to not know where to turn to because they feel like they don't have resources. And that's why I say we have to get the message out. Where do you start? Where do you begin? Because it's scary. And I would love for those people that didn't think that this would get as bad as it did, but if they knew right from the beginning, okay, if I can't make it to the next month, maybe I should start seeking these people out, even if it's just to start the process, and maybe stop them from getting to that 3rd month. That might have been helpful and not have gotten as bad as it did. I was getting calls, I mean, and I don't blame these people, a couple calls within 2 days. I'd get 3 or 4 calls. What can we do? What can we do? And I literally was not educated enough. I didn't even know to call you, to be truthful with it, and that's on me and nobody else. But I would love for us to have some kind of resources for anybody in the city or anything like that, to have this really quick guideline. What do you do if you feel that you're falling, and so on. And I also just want to add one other thing that I learned this morning, and I kind of found it quite disturbing. I won't give where this is because I have a feeling it's not legal. But what's popping up is what I'm referring to as car shelters. In parking lots, people are literally renting out their cars for people to sleep in at night. Or that some people, out of the goodness of the heart, are leaving their cars there for people to come and sleep in at night. That is also one of these kind of things that are coming out of this type of a situation. And that worries me too and scares me too, which is why I think we need warming shelters and so on, and places for people to leave. Desperate times will cause desperate results and answers to it. But not to belabor again that other thing, I think sooner than later we have to have something where people can go, and whether it's in the school system, literally in their bathrooms. Are you not safe at home, but are you this, are you that? Get this in the young minds. You know, sending it home, any documentation that comes there. I think Alderman Melissa Golger, you had made a comment once when we were talking about the Performing Arts Center about having something downstairs that had all the wonderful things that were happening here in the city of Nashua. Something like this would be great to have there too. I walked by here, and that's when I saw the 2 bedbug things that I picked up because we've got some of that in mine. So it's nice to just have that pamphlet that you pick up and put it in locations that you might not, even restaurants, anything like this. I think these one-sheet kind of pullouts are so important. And I think that's a quick, fast, easy step to get something going, even before we do all this huge branding, just to get something out there. Ask restaurants if they'll put it in their bathrooms. People have nothing else to do but read in the bathroom. And as silly as it sounds, it's a good place to have it or anything of that nature. I just think the sooner the better. I know how I felt not being able to help them. I can't imagine how it must have felt for them, thinking, okay, waited too long, but now what can I do? And they did get help in the end, but what if we couldn't have? They would have been out on the street, and then maybe we would have been able to help them more. But so I really think sooner than later is really important.
If I could just follow up briefly
Absolutely.
on that. Excellent points. I did just want to clarify, we don't really look at if someone can pay us
Right.
back, but we look for some sort of sustainability. What's the plan
Right, yes,
moving on in the future? And that's not a sole criteria, but that's a part of what we look at. Additionally, some of it kind of goes back to what you said earlier, Alderman Clee, about the 211 number.
Yeah.
And that's something that we tend to promote pretty heavily because people can remember that.
Mhm.
And if people don't know what to do or they're not even sure what they're looking for, if they call 211, they have trained staff that can kind of assess and work through that. And they may say, it sounds like you could benefit from applying at your municipal welfare office, or you may need some other resource. But they have a data bank full of different resources in the community to kind of assess individuals' needs. So that is a big part of the marketing as well. So something like that could be helpful, but this is definitely something that we can take a look at.
Thank you.
So I got a message from Alderman Lopez. He didn't realize you were going to be here this evening talking about this, but he did ask me to tell you that he's working on the People Count app.
Oh, okay, great,
Good.
great.
I looked at
Yeah,
it.
Yeah,
yeah.
so.
I text him and said, "Where are you?" He went, "Oops."
That app is very good. It
Yes.
shows up the 10 cities and all these. I was looking at it this morning when we were, yeah.
Alderman Karen.
Thank you. I love this discussion. Not to date myself, but when you were talking about people working, because they're collecting something, when we were in your building,
Yes.
we had people come in, and what they were doing was printing T-shirts for our programs. And several of them got jobs at T-shirt companies and got off of the welfare rolls, and they were wonderful. Yeah, and I remember them cleaning.
Yeah.
So that shows you
Yeah.
how long ago that has been in. I think that was last year. So may I have two questions?
Karen,
Number
yes.
one, I volunteer at the senior center, and they have an office called Service Link.
Yes,
Are they,
Yes.
they're familiar with you. They have the department's number.
very much so,
Okay,
yes.
because
Yes.
they do a lot of that, and I know that they and us give out that 211
Right.
number to
Yes,
people who
yes.
come in.
Yep.
But not to get off topic, but I was looking at your expense sheets, and you were showing 2018 September and 2019 September,
Yes.
and, it's 10,000, almost 10,000. Have you gathered your data for October of this year, and has it gone up? Has it stabilized, or?
Yes, it has gone up, and that report went out, let's see,
Yeah, last week, wasn't it?
November 1st.
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I missed it.
I try to get them out at the beginning of the month.
Okay.
It did go up pretty significantly, and I think a lot of that has to do with, again, the rental market
Okay.
and the cost of rents. One of the things that did come out in the report that came out November 1st, some of our payments for some of the motels were not processed
Okay.
until the following month. So they actually showed up in October, but they were actually for September assistance. So that kind of means that our number for September was actually a little higher, but it showed up on our number for October because
Oh.
it wasn't processed until later in the month.
Okay.
But it has gone up, and it's primarily due to the rental costs and the fact that people coming in to see us were eligible for assistance.
Okay. So unfortunately, we have no control over rents.
Well,
and that makes it a little difficult
We
for you.
don't, and, you know, we're also at that point, I believe I mentioned this earlier on, that we're just prior to the winter moratorium, so that the utility companies push heavy to collect as much as they can, and they're shutting people off. And so we're required to pay a bit to get them restored. We will see that drop off a little bit after, I believe it's the 15th or the 18th of this month. As we enter into the winter moratorium, it's just a little more difficult, and utility companies are less likely to shut people off during the winter time. I had another thought, and it's gone. Sorry.
Well, I thank you for that. I for some reason, I missed it or didn't open it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything further for Mr. Mack? We appreciate you being here
Well.
this evening.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity and all the input and feedback and interest. And we definitely have some things to follow up on. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment. Seeing none, remarks by Alderman. Alderman Gathright.
I just want to say thank you very much to our welfare officer. I'm glad I received the document. I've never, ever thought to read it before. But, you know, I think that we all should at least have a general understanding of how it works. So I appreciate this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mack. Thank you. Alderman Clee.
Yes, I too would like to thank Mr. Mack for everything and answering my questions. And I agree with what Alderman Gathright had mentioned, is that especially when you're new, and that's why I kind of floundered, and it was nice to have someone such as Director Mack to be able to answer my questions and so on, and to be able to help me with it. And I really did appreciate that thing. And thank you for taking the time to answer all the questions and my badgering about wanting a document. I truly, truly appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have no need for a non-public. Do I have a motion? Alderman Karen.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned at 8:15. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question for you.
Mute all.